In the chaotic world of the Level 1 Trauma Center at St. Jude's Memorial, silence is often mistaken for weakness, and age is mistaken for incompetence. For 3 years, the staff mocked Abigail Ross. They laughed at her slight limp. They rolled their eyes at her silence. The young residents, fresh out of medical school with egos bigger than their paychecks, treated her like the furniture, useful, but beneath notice. They didn't know that the hands-changing bedpans today had once held the lives of entire platoons together under mortar fire. They didn't know her limp was a medal of honor carved into her very bone. They thought she was just a tired old woman. They were wrong, and it took a dying colonel and a room full of stunned generals to teach them the most important lesson of their lives. You never judge a warrior by the uniform they wear in peacetime. The fluorescent lights of the St. Jude's emergency room hummed with a low, headache-inducing buzz, a sound Abigail Ross had long since learned to tune out. At 54, Abby moved with a deliberate, rhythmic pace that the younger nurses often mistook for slowness. She didn't rush. She didn't sprint down the hallways with a stethoscope flying around her neck like a superhero's cape. She moved with economy. Every step was calculated. Every motion had a purpose. But to Dr. Caleb Sterling, the new chief resident, she was just an obstacle. "Ross, for God's sake, move it!" Sterling barked, snapping his fingers in her direction. He was standing by Trauma Bay 2, holding a clipboard like a weapon. He was 32, brilliant, handsome in a catalogue model sort of way, and entirely insufferable. "I asked for the saline drip 3 minutes ago. My patient is dehydrating while you're taking a scenic stroll." Abby didn't flinch. She didn't look up from the cart she was organizing, her hands moving deftly to arrange the vials. "The saline is already hung, doctor," she said, her voice raspy, low, and calm. "I did it before you asked. Check the line." Sterling blinked, spinning around to look at the patient, a young man with a mild concussion from a frat party gone wrong. Sure enough, the bag was there, the drip steady. Sterling's face flushed a deep crimson, not from embarrassment, but from the anger of being corrected. He hated being corrected, especially by her. She was a relic, an LPN in a world of specialized RNs and nurse practitioners. She wore scrubs that were always clean, but slightly faded, and she had that limp, a stiff, hitching gait in her left leg that slowed the flow of traffic in his ER. "Don't get smart with me, Ross," Sterling sneered, lowering his voice so the patient wouldn't hear, but the other nurses certainly did. "Just because you manage to anticipate one order doesn't make you competent. You're clogging up my floor. Why don't you go change the bedpans in geriatrics? That seems more your speed." A ripple of snickers went through the nursing station. Jessica and Chloe, two fresh graduates who idolized Sterling, covered their mouths to hide their giggles. They called Abby the tortoise behind her back. Abby finally looked up. Her eyes were grey, the color of a storm cloud that had already rained itself out. There was no anger in them, only a deep, weary patience. "I'm assigned to trauma, doctor. Unless the charge nurse moves me, I stay." "We'll see about that," Sterling muttered, brushing past her and deliberately bumping her shoulder. Abby took the impact without swaying. She was solid, built like someone who had carried heavy loads for a long time. She watched him walk away, her hand instinctively going to her left hip, rubbing the scar tissue through the fabric of her scrubs. "Don't let him get to you, Abby," whispered Martha, the head charge nurse, as she walked by with a stack of files. Martha was the only one who treated Abby with decency, though even she didn't know the full story. "He's just stressed. The board is reviewing his tenure next month." "Stress is no excuse for lack of discipline," Abby said quietly. Martha chuckled, shaking her head. "You always sound like my grandfather. Discipline. Look, just keep your head down. I tried to get you off Sterling's rotation, but he specifically requested you. I think he likes having someone to kick around." "I've been kicked by worse men than Caleb Sterling," Abby murmured, turning back to her cart. The night shift dragged on. It was a Friday, which meant the usual parade of chaos. Bar fights, car accidents, and overdoses. Through it all, Abby was a ghost. She was everywhere and nowhere. While the other nurses panicked over a sudden drop in blood pressure, Abby was already pushing the crash cart into position before the alarm even sounded. When a drunk patient took a swing at a security guard, Abby didn't scream. She simply sidestepped, grabbed the patient's wrist in a pressure lock that looked effortless, and guided him back onto the gurney. "Whoa," Jessica said, blinking as she watched Abby secure the restraints. "Where did you learn that?" "Self-defense class at the Y," Abby lied smoothly. She checked the restraints. Tight, but not cutting circulation. Professional. Jessica rolled her eyes, losing interest immediately. "Right, the Y. Anyway, did you hear? We have a VIP incoming. Code Black protocol." Abby froze. Code Black meant high-level government or military. "Who is it?" "Some military guy. Colonel something. Apparently he collapsed at a gala downtown. Heart failure, possible stroke. They're diverting him here because we have the best cardiac unit in the state." Jessica checked her reflection in the glass cabinet. "I hope he's handsome. Or at least rich." Abby felt a cold prickle at the base of her neck. A colonel. She hadn't been around brass in 10 years. Not since the hearing. Not since she walked away from the life that had consumed her for 2 decades. "Dr. Sterling is freaking out," Chloe chimed in, joining them. "He wants everything perfect. He's yelling at everyone. He told me if I mess up the IV, he'll have my license." "He's insecure," Abby said. "He needs to focus on the medicine, not the rank." "Easy for you to say," Chloe snapped. "You're just an LPN. You don't have a career to lose. If Sterling messes this up, he's done. If he saves a war hero, he's golden." "A war hero," Abby repeated, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Let's hope he survives long enough to be saved." The radio at the nursing station crackled to life. "ETA 2 minutes. Male, 60s, unstable, vitals crashing, BP 70/40, pulse thready. Get ready, people." 2 minutes, Sterling screamed, bursting out of the break room. "I want trauma, 1 clear. Ross, get out of there. I want competent nurses only. Jessica, Chloe, you're with me. Ross, go manage the waiting room. Keep the riffraff away from the VIP area." It was a demotion in the middle of a crisis. Managing the waiting room was the lowest job in the ER. Abby looked at Sterling. She saw the sweat beading on his forehead. He was terrified. He was going to fumble this. She knew the look of a man who was out of his depth. "Doctor," Abby said, her voice firm, "you might need an extra pair of hands for the airway. His vitals suggest—" "I said get out!" Sterling roared, pointing at the double doors. "Go sit at the desk and check insurance cards. That is a direct order." The entire ER went silent. Patients looked over. Other doctors averted their eyes. Abby held his gaze for a second longer than was comfortable. Then she nodded once. "Understood, doctor." She turned and walked toward the waiting room, her limp slightly more pronounced as fatigue set in. She could feel the eyes of the staff on her back, pitying, mocking. The quiet nurse, the old nurse, the one who cleans up the mess. But as she pushed through the swing doors, the sirens wailed outside, louder and closer. The ambulance screeched into the bay. Abby paused by the glass, looking out into the rain-slicked night. She watched the paramedics unload the stretcher. She saw the uniform first. Dress blues, medals flashing under the ambulance lights, and then she saw the face. Abby's breath hitched. Her hand flew to her mouth. It wasn't just any colonel. It was Colonel Richard Iron Graves. And the last time she had seen him, he was holding her hand in a dust-choked medical tent in Kandahar, promising her that he would never forget what she did. The waiting room was a purgatory of coughing children, anxious spouses, and the smell of stale coffee. Abby sat behind the plexiglass, ostensibly checking in a young woman with a twisted ankle, but her mind was 50 feet away, in Trauma 1. She could hear the shouting. The walls of the ER were thin, and chaos has a way of penetrating soundproofing. "I can't get the tube in. His throat is swollen." That was Sterling. Panic was raising his voice an octave. O2 sats are dropping. 85%. 82. Jessica's voice trembling. Push EPI. Push it now. Abby's fingers drummed on the desk. She knew exactly what was happening. Anaphylactic reaction to a medication, likely combined with the cardiac event. Graves had a severe allergy to specific contrast dyes, something only his personal medical file would show, a file that likely hadn't arrived yet. She checked the triage computer. Nothing. They were flying blind. "Mom?" The girl with the twisted ankle asked. "Are you okay? You look intense." Abby stood up. "Excuse me for a moment." She couldn't stay here. Orders be damned. Sterling was going to kill him. Abby moved. The limp vanished. She entered the main ER floor not as the tired LPN, but as Major Abigail Ross, formerly of the 101st Airborne Combat Surgical Unit. She didn't run, she flowed. She burst into Trauma 1 just as the monitor began the flat, monotone wail of a flatline. "Beep! He's coding!" Jessica screamed. "We lost him!" Sterling was frozen, holding the intubation blade, his hands shaking violently. "Defib, charge to 200, he yelled, his voice cracking. "Clear! Don't shock him!" Abby's voice cut through the noise like a whip crack. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Sterling spun around, wild-eyed. "Get the hell out of here, Ross! Security!" Abby ignored him. She stepped up to the table, shoving Chloe aside with a hip check that sent the younger nurse stumbling. She looked at the colonel's chest. No rise. His face was swelling rapidly. "It's not just a heart attack, you idiot. It's anaphylaxis closing his airway," Abby snapped. She didn't look at Sterling. She looked at the patient. "He's allergic to iodine. Did you use contrast for the scan?" We were prepping," Sterling stammered. "Give me the scalpel. 10 blade. Now." Abby held out her hand. "You can't cut. You're a nurse," Sterling shouted, trying to body block her. "I'll have you arrested. If you don't give me that blade, he dies in 30 seconds, Abby hissed, her face inches from Sterling's. "And I will make sure the autopsy report shows exactly why." Maybe it was the steel in her eyes. Maybe it was the fact that the patient was turning blue. Sterling hesitated. Abby didn't wait. She reached past him, grabbed the scalpel from the tray, and turned back to the colonel. "Cricoid pressure," she ordered Jessica. "What?" Jessica froze. "Press on his throat. Here." Abby grabbed Jessica's hand and slammed it onto the colonel's neck. "Hold it!" With a precision that made the room gasp, Abby made a vertical incision at the base of the throat. Blood welled up, but she didn't hesitate. She used the handle of the scalpel to separate the tissue, finding the trachea. "Tube," she demanded. Chloe, operating on instinct, handed her a pediatric tube. Abby slotted it in. She listened. A hiss of air. The chest rose. "Bag him," Abby said, stepping back, her hands bloody. "Now!" Jessica squeezed the ambu bag. The chest rose again. On the monitor, the flatline jagged into a chaotic but present rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. "Sinus rhythm returning," the respiratory tech whispered, staring at Abby in disbelief. "Sats are coming up. 90%. The room was dead silent. The only sound was the rhythmic whoosh of the bag and the beep of the monitor. Abby took a breath, wiping a spot of blood from her cheek with her shoulder. She looked at the colonel's face. He was alive. She turned to find Dr. Sterling staring at her, his face a mask of humiliation and rage. "You," Sterling whispered, his voice shaking. "You just performed an unauthorized surgical procedure. You assaulted a superior. I saved his life," Abby said calmly. "You're fired," Sterling screamed, finding his voice. Get out of my hospital. I will have your license revoked by morning. You are done, Ross. Done." Abby looked at him. She looked at the nurses who were staring at her like she was a monster. She looked at the colonel, stable now, breathing. "Fine," she said softly. "I'm done." She untied her mask, dropped it into the biohazard bin, and walked out of the trauma room. She didn't look back. She went to the locker room, took her purse, and walked out the back exit into the rain. She thought it was over. She thought she would go home, feed her cat, and figure out how to live on a pension she had barely touched. But the next morning, the hospital didn't call the police. They called the Pentagon, because when Colonel Iron Graves woke up in the ICU, the first thing he did wasn't to ask for water. He grabbed Dr. Sterling by the lapels of his white coat with a grip like a vice. "Where is she?" the colonel rasped, his voice damaged but terrifying. "Who, sir?" Sterling squeaked. "The angel," Graves growled. "I saw her. I heard her voice. The angel of Kandahar. Where is Major Ross?" The rain that had started the night Abigail Ross walked out of St. Jude's hadn't stopped by morning. It drummed against the window of her small one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, a rhythmic accompaniment to the dread sitting heavy in her stomach. Abby sat at her kitchen table, staring at a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. On the table sat a small, battered wooden box. Inside were things she hadn't looked at in a decade: a silver star, a purple heart, and a photograph of a younger woman in desert fatigues standing next to a smiling, dusty Colonel Graves. She hadn't told anyone at St. Jude's about her past. In the civilian world, people didn't understand. They asked intrusive questions about how many people she'd killed, or looked at her with pity she didn't want. So she had buried Major Ross and became just Abby, the quiet LPN with the bad leg. The phone rang, shattering the silence. It was the hospital administration. "Miss Ross," the voice was icy. It was Mrs. Gable, the Director of Human Resources. "We need you to come in immediately. The board is convening an emergency review regarding the incident last night. Dr. Sterling has filed formal charges of gross negligence and assault." "I saved his life," Abby said, her voice tired. "That is not the version of events Dr. Sterling has provided," Gable replied sharply. "If you do not appear, we will proceed with revoking your license in absentia and will refer the matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." Abby closed her eyes. It wasn't enough to fire her. Sterling wanted to destroy her. He wanted to make sure she could never work again, just to cover his own panic. "I'll be there in an hour," Abby said. Underscore, 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 underscore. Back at the hospital, the atmosphere was poisonous. Dr. Caleb Sterling was pacing the floor of the administrator's office, looking every bit the victim. He had spent the morning terrorizing the nursing staff. He had pulled Jessica and Chloe into the supply closet and made it very clear: if anyone asks, I ordered the cricothyrotomy. I guided her hand. She was hysterical, and I had to take control. If you say otherwise, you'll be looking for jobs in rural clinics by Monday. Terrified for their own careers, the young nurses had nodded. Now Sterling stood before Mr. Henderson, the hospital administrator. "She's a liability, sir. She's old, she's slow, and last night she snapped. She pushed me, physically pushed me, and started hacking at a VIP patient's throat. It's a miracle Colonel Graves didn't bleed out on the table. I managed to stabilize the airway after she butchered the incision." Henderson, a man who cared more about lawsuits than medicine, rubbed his temples. "And the patient? How is he?" "He's in a medically induced coma in the ICU," Sterling lied smoothly. "Stable but critical. When he wakes up, we need to be able to tell him that the rogue nurse responsible for his disfigurement has been dealt with." "Fine," Henderson sighed. "We'll terminate her today. Quietly. Non-disclosure agreements all around." When Abby arrived, she walked the gauntlet. The ER was busy, and as she limped towards the administrative wing, the whispers followed her like smoke. "That's her. The one who attacked Dr. Sterling. Crazy old lady." She kept her chin up, her face a mask of stone. She wore her best suit, a navy blue blazer that was 10 years old but pressed sharp. She didn't look like a disgraced nurse. She walked with a cadence that, if anyone had been paying attention, was pure military march time. She entered the boardroom. A long mahogany table stretched out before her. At the far end sat Henderson, Mrs. Gable, and Dr. Sterling, who was smirking slightly as he reviewed a file. "Sit down, Miss Ross," Henderson said, not bothering to look up. Abby remained standing. "I prefer to stand, sir." Sterling scoffed, still playing the martyr. "Look, let's make this quick. You performed an unauthorized surgery. You endangered a patient. You assaulted a superior officer, a doctor." "I identified an anaphylactic crisis that the attending physician missed," Abby said, her voice clear and projecting to the back of the room. "I requested the attending perform a cricothyrotomy. He froze. The patient flatlined. I acted to preserve life, in accordance with the Hippocratic Oath, which supersedes hospital hierarchy, in a life-or-death event." "You're a liar." Sterling slammed his hand on the table. "You nearly killed him. I had to fix your mess." "Check the security cameras in Trauma 1, Abby challenged. "The cameras in Trauma 1 were malfunctioning last night," Henderson interjected smoothly. "Conveniently for you, Miss Ross, so we only have the witness statements." He slid a piece of paper across the table. "Dr. Sterling, Nurse Jessica Miller, and Nurse Chloe Evans all state that you were acting erratically and aggressively." Abby felt a cold knot in her chest. They had erased the footage. Or Sterling had. "The fix was in. We are terminating your employment immediately," Henderson continued. "Furthermore, we are reporting this to the State Board of Nursing. You will never practice again. If you sign this admission of guilt, we will agree not to press criminal assault charges. If you fight us, we will ruin you." Abby looked at the paper. It was a confession. It said she was incompetent. It said she was sorry. She looked at Sterling. He was smiling, a cruel, predatory smile. He had won. He had crushed the witness to his cowardice. Abby reached for the pen. She had no money for a lawyer. She had no family to support her. She was just an old woman against a multi-million-dollar institution. "Sign it," Sterling goaded. "Be a good girl and sign it." Abby's hand hovered over the paper. The tip of the pen touched the line. The pen never finished the first letter of her name. A low rumble began to vibrate through the floor of the boardroom. It wasn't thunder. It sounded like heavy machinery. Or engines. Then came the sound of slamming doors. Not the polite swish of the hospital's automatic sliders, but the heavy, synchronized thud of multiple vehicles pulling up to the main entrance directly below the boardroom window. "What is that noise?" Henderson asked, annoyed. Sterling walked to the window and looked down. His face went pale. "What the—" Below, 3 matte black SUVs had pulled up onto the sidewalk, blocking the main entrance. Flanking them were 2 military Humvees. Men in fatigues were spilling out. Not local police, not private security. These were military police, armed with carbines, moving with terrifying speed and precision. "Is there a terrorist threat?" Mrs. Gable squeaked. Before anyone could answer, the boardroom doors didn't just open. They were flung wide so hard that the handle punched a hole in the drywall. 2 soldiers in full tactical gear stepped in, sweeping the room with their eyes before taking positions on either side of the door. They didn't speak. They just stood there, statues of intimidation. Then a man walked in. He was wearing the dress greens of a 3-star general. He was an older man, with steel-grey hair cut high and tight, and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. It was General Marcus Clayton, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Behind him walked 2 aides and, trailing nervously, the hospital's chief of surgery. Sterling's mouth fell open. Henderson scrambled to his feet, knocking over his chair. "Good General! To what do we owe this honor? If this is about Colonel Graves, I assure you, Dr. Sterling here has—" General Clayton ignored Henderson entirely. He didn't even look at him. His eyes scanned the room, bypassing Sterling, bypassing the expensive artwork, until they landed on the woman standing at the end of the table in the navy blazer. The general stopped. The room went deathly silent. Sterling stepped forward, trying to regain control. "General, please, we are in the middle of a disciplinary hearing for a rogue employee. If you could give us a moment to remove her." "Shut your mouth," the general said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The command was absolute. Sterling snapped his mouth shut with an audible click. General Clayton walked the length of the long table. He stopped 3 feet from Abby. He looked her up and down, taking in the tired eyes, the slight slump of her shoulders, the pen in her hand. Then, slowly, deliberately, the general snapped his heels together. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. He raised his hand in a crisp, perfect salute. "Major Ross," the general said, his voice thick with emotion. Abby straightened. The fatigue seemed to fall off her. Her chin rose. She dropped the pen. She returned the salute, her form as perfect as the day she left the service. "General Clayton," she replied softly. "At ease, Major," Clayton said, dropping his hand. He stepped forward and, breaking protocol, grabbed Abby's hand in both of his. "My God, Abby, we thought you were dead. When the dust settled in Kandahar, the reports said you were MIA. We looked for you for 2 years." "I didn't want to be found, Marcus," Abby said, a sad smile touching her lips. "I left the service. I just wanted quiet." "Quiet?" The general laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You call saving iron graves quiet? The man woke up an hour ago. He couldn't speak, so he wrote on a notepad. 2 words. Major Ross. Then he tried to get out of bed to find you himself. We had to sedate him." Sterling made a noise like a dying kettle. "Major." "Ross?" The general turned slowly to face Sterling. The warmth vanished.